So let's talk to our expert, Tammy Butler, who I'm very excited to have here today. Tammy's been in the business a long time. She's very well known in the business. She's almost a guru. She was a top originator, has been in operations. She was a top manager. She's currently at Optimal Blue as a director on the compliance side, but certainly she knows both the sales and the operational side. Tammy writes a lot for the MBA. She speaks at conferences, and so I'm very pleased to have her today. And more importantly, I have to share with you that Tammy is a University of Maryland graduate, which I am also, so I am very pleased to have another Terp as one of our guest presenters. Hi, Tammy.
Hi, Pat. Yay, go Terps. Fear the turtle.
I know. They have to work on the Fear the Turtle one, but it looks like our
Yeah,
basketball team's going to be good. So let's, Tammy, talk about these issues. In particularly, I know you've spent a lot of time and have been at a lot of mortgage banking companies, and this whole issue of workflow efficiencies. Kind of what is your thoughts on what works, what doesn't, and what do you think that the attendees on the webinar really should be emphasizing in 2015?
Well, I think as I look back over my whole career, the one thing that I realized is the way that we used to do things doesn't work anymore. And that was really the way I was brought into the origination world, which I'm sure many on the phone call can relate to. Here are your business cards, go get loans. That was pretty much what we got for training. And I decided that when I went into management, I developed previous to that, as part of my origination practice, I developed a little bit different approach to how I was going to bring in loans. It wasn't going to be the typical, let's drop things in a mailbox that called a rate sheet and bring donuts and see what happens. So I began to work on that from more of a scientific side of what sorts of practices were working in more of the what we'll call generic financial services, Fortune 500 companies. How did they get business in the door? And as I began to work that approach on my own business, that worked out very well and created a top producer with my business. Then what I did is I took that to the management world and managing originators and bringing them up to speed. And I found that there are several different things that are extremely important to having a good origination environment where you've got top producers and, most importantly, where you keep top producers. And with that, I'd be happy to share those techniques with you on what worked for me.
Yeah, that'd be great. Why don't you share kind of your best practices?
Okay, great. So essentially, one of the companies I was brought on board, and this repeated the pattern through several companies, but we went from $120 million to $1.2 billion within a 24-month period in a non-refinance market. And here were the best practices that we used. First of all, it has to do with the workflow efficiencies. One of my favorite quotes by Steve Jobs is, customers don't measure you on how hard you try, they measure you on what you deliver. So we needed to work out a plan in this company. Everybody was about to leave. The loan officers had it, the origination staff, or excuse me, the operations staff had it, and so they were all going to leave. So we had to get to the root of the cause of what was problematic here. And what I found to be problematic is the first thing. The first thing is nobody knew what their responsibilities were, and so therefore some people were getting away with not doing anything, and other people were doing way too much for their job position, which would certainly cause them to leave. So the first thing we did is we worked on the workflow efficiencies. And to keep it simple, what I did is I called everyone into the room for a specific position, and on a whiteboard we said, what are you supposed to do? What is your job? And we got variances on that theme, but we eventually agreed to what their job would be. Once we did all of that, we then developed out the workflow, and the next thing that we did is we said, okay, so if this is your job and you agree to this, are you willing to do this? And if you're not, if you don't agree to it, then it means that you don't think it's your job. And they said, no, 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 this is our job. Okay. So then we had to put stops in to correct behavior, because what I find a lot of times is that your good loan officers, who want to do well and want great customer service are really fanatical, like I was, about setting up that file perfectly, making sure that when it goes to processing, you're not going to have a bunch of blow-ups so that you have a lot of problems to deal with. And so we put stops in the workflow that were about the first month everybody was having tantrums over, but after that they got over it. And the surprising thing about it is that they saw their income and their production increase dramatically. And this is where the beginning of some of the production started to occur. So, as an example, if a loan officer said, I'm supposed to fill out an application completely, and I'm supposed to do this deal structure, and I'm supposed to do this, and it got to the loan opener and it wasn't done, it went back to the loan officer until that behavior was corrected. So it didn't get forced down the throat of a loan opener or a processor. And same with a processor. If they're supposed to do certain things and they sent it to underwriting and it didn't have those things, it went back to processing. And these are really hard lessons to learn, but growing up in a military family and also playing sports, you can kind of see that whole coaching mechanism of where everybody has a job to do, let's get it done, and we'll all be more effective as a team. The second thing that I did is I was a strong believer in sales meetings are not to go over the latest memos. Sales meetings in my world were sales training opportunities. Now, nowadays they're done on webinars because everyone's all over the place, but sales meetings are once a week and they're sales training opportunities. What I found very interesting when I started this is if the sales meeting started at 9 and they weren't in at 9, well, the door got shut and you're out. And at first the top producers really didn't want to show up. You know, I'm good at this, I know what I'm doing, I don't need any of this. But as they saw some of the rookie superstars start to pass them in production, they became more curious and showed up on time, and as a result of that, their production started going up. So that was certainly the second technique that I employed. And then the third technique that I employed was having a mixture of not only your seasoned originators, which of course we all want because that seems easy, but it's not always easy to keep seasoned originators or to get them on board. I also had a mixture of the seasoned originators with ones that I organically grow, which are people that have the aptitude and the ability and the desire, but need a blueprint for success. In other words, what do I need to do, really, not just hand out rate sheets or drop off donuts or some of the other things. Well, what do I really need to do in order to make this happen, and being able to train them in that capacity. And what I found was really interesting. Not only did we keep people, but my shop became recruiting proof. Because as people tried to recruit my people with the sales training that they had, with the marketing support that they had, with the customer service coming back really strong and the process flows good, it actually caused other companies to not be able to tap into my sales force and bring them on board. And that, to me, this was a successful blueprint for origination. So in a nutshell, those were my best practices, and that's what I did.
So Tammy, when you think about it, and certainly the sales training part, if you could talk a little bit more about that. In other words, a lot of times managers feel that that's this training department's job, or if there is a training department, or on the other hand, what they end up doing is just talking about what they did as originator, which really is not sales training. So how did you basically keep on top of what would be worthwhile that actually translated into more production?
Well, you know, I'm a strong believer in that most of the, and this is not to take a hit at training entities within mortgage companies. They certainly have their place. You know, here's a new compliance rule, you need to understand that, or here's some basic ways to use our phone system, you need to know that. But if you've never originated a loan and you've never sat across from a real estate agent, or you've never tried to get an appointment with one or a builder, then you really don't have the necessary knowledge in order to drill in what I would call the blueprint on how to do that. And so what I would do is I would take the hard parts. How is it that you warm up somebody enough in order to have a conversation with them? How is it that you market people enough so that you actually have some sort of an interest, that you're not just doing what everyone else is doing, but that you have some sort of an interest that they may want to reach out to you? I took the tough stuff so that we could get rid of the way to approach any referral source that you're looking for. Each week I'd have a topic. Basically it came from real life experiences, or it came from something that I had tried on my own, or something I had heard was working for someone else, and we went through that technique. Most importantly, what we also did is we would take some time to practice that technique. So it wasn't just a book, here's what you need to do and how you need to do it. I'd actually break them into groups and say, okay, now what are you going to do to sell the other person, or how are you going to warm up this prospect? And it was a series of trainings, and if you do this every week, then you end up with about 50 trainings, 1 hour long. We kept them short, 50 trainings, 1 hour long every year that have a direct impact on your bottom line in bringing in origination. I also had a very low threshold for people who were given training and didn't apply it, and just kind of, they just didn't want to do the business. I like to get rid of them very quickly if after a certain period of time they just really don't want to do it and they're kind of waiting for loans to fall in their lap. That does not create the best environment, and you want a group of people that are all high performers so that they all feed off of one another.
Right. That's a great point. And certainly what I see is that your top performers are the individuals, as I've already mentioned, that have this developing expertise motivation. So many times what you end up seeing is that the manager is just an average or below manager and doesn't really want to deal with them, when these are the people that will take training and take it to a next level. It's kind of interesting that people assume if you just leave them alone that would be enough, and that's really not the case. So why don't you talk about, you did rookies, and it's a big issue within the industry. Why don't you kind of share, you were at a branch manager level. How did that kind of work?
Well, what you do is you get people who have, I look for people who have an insatiable drive and really, really want to set the world on fire. That was the first thing that I looked at. But I also looked at somebody who had really strong work ethic. So as an example, 2 of my people came from a call center, if you remember the old household finance.
Sure.
That was brutal. You had to stay on the phone all day long calling people for a $2,000 line of credit to charge them 30% interest. That was a tough sale, right?
Right.
And they were young and looking for some sort of opportunity out of that, but I could see that they were persistent, I could see that they were driven, and I could see that they wanted a different life. Another person was studying for their, I forget what they're called, for the stockbroker, the test for the stockbrokers. It's not coming to my head right now. I could see that she was very driven up in an environment where work ethic was important and drive, and she was really looking to make it, right?
Right.
Those are the people that I found would acclimate quite well to a sales training approach that had more of a blueprint. And when I say more of a blueprint, I mean that for the first 6 months, they were all given, okay, this week, this is what you do. And then next week, you do this. And then next week, you do this. And that approach over a 6-month period turned most of these who are still top-performing originators into top-performing originators. And if I look at that, and the fact that it only took them about 6 months to get up to speed, and I looked at the fact that they were so used to the way that we did business and we provided so much value to their business, then you can imagine how it was rare that anybody ever actually left. I lost one person once who decided to become a real estate agent. But that was okay, because then she became a referral source.
Sure. Sure. So when you're looking at, and just kind of what you see even currently, not just when you managed, what are some of what I call the leading and laggard kind of performance standards that kind of are an indication of, the person's going to be a good producer versus a poor producer?
Well, I'll be honest with you. What I've seen over the last 10 years is pretty sad. Um, I talk to a lot of lenders, as you can imagine, with the amount of lenders that Optimal Blue works with. And I talk to a lot of their sales leaders, and I'm appalled by the fact that we've got so many people that don't know how to even structure a loan at the basic level, don't know how to take a loan application, couldn't answer an underwriting question if they had to, have no idea what their marketing strategy should be because they are fed leads all day long, don't even know how to go call on a real estate agent. And when you've got an industry of a bunch of those types of people in your organization, then that's an industry, or excuse me, that is doomed to fail if you don't correct it. And you need to correct it because the times have changed. Refinances are drying up. We're going back to more of a generic sort of purchase money market. Consumers, especially the millennial population, they're getting far more savvy when it comes to information due to the access of information that they get online. And that's what you're competing with. So if you're not real strapped in those areas, then your chances of becoming a successful top-performing producer that has a consistent pipeline are going to be low. But what I also see is that many people are reticent to let go of this low-hanging fruit because at least they're bringing in something, is the way they look at it.
Right.
And the way that I see that is that's bad for your profit, right, because you've got low-hanging fruit and you've got people that aren't doing what they need to do and maybe are saying things they don't need to say within your origination organization. But on the compliance side nowadays, you really can't afford to have people that, aren't in it to win the whole game.
Yeah, that's a really great point. We've had some questions that have come up regarding some of the things you said. They wanted to know, one of the questions is, how would you, this issue, originators feel many times that they're almost performing an underwriting function where so much of the file and the paperwork per se is being done by them before it gets shipped in to the processor or the operational side. What's kind of your opinion on that, and what do you see works best?
Well, it's funny because I've got an article coming out in March called The Mighty Millennials Passing the Torch, and it's about my journey with my son, who is 25, and two of his friends who decided to become originators. And essentially I told them that I would help them if they would go old school. And what I meant by old school is that they had to spend 3 hours a week going through basically what it means to have a mortgage, how to structure a mortgage, the different mortgage programs, the highs, the lows, the bads, the goods. And they spent the first 6 months because I said, if you want to originate loans, I would expect that you would know almost as much as an underwriter. That way you're not harming consumers, right? And that way you're not ticking off your referral sources that you work so hard to get. So they went through that, and they're very well done. The deal application, I certainly recommend that as part of your training program. But then the second part of it, now what we're working on 3 hours, is we're defining their blueprint for marketing and what that should look like, taking into account all of the newer techniques and what we'll call the millennial marketing and how to get at them. And that's been interesting because they learn from me and I learn from them.
So, Tammy, when you talk about, getting back to the same issue, kind of the trend line that you see at many sales shops is that the originator's asked to do a lot with putting the file together. Kind of what do you see works with that? And the reality of it is, shouldn't the salesperson be out selling?
Well, certainly the salesperson needs to be out selling, but, how do you sell if you don't know? You're the one responsible for your reputation.
Right.
So if you don't at least have an elemental knowledge of structuring that loan and what may be the best fit for that consumer, you certainly can't expect that somebody that's on a salary and being thrown 50 files or more a month is going to step up and take that opportunity. And you need to know enough about the different types of products out there and why one person would go with one product over another, and what are some of the pitfalls of some products versus another, so that you can basically advise your client, not necessarily advise them to the program they need to go with, but at least let them know, here are all the options that you have, and is all the good, bad, and ugly. Now you decide what's going to be best for you. But you've done that educative effort. I've always been the type of salesperson that offers the education up front, which gives a lot of value, and through that value, you get a lot of referrals and more referral sources. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah. So from your viewpoint, I mean, if there was the one, in other words, if there was the one issue, and certainly what I see is your better performing originators typically don't have the files that are not very good. And where you really see the problem at is that what I call kind of the average or below originator, that's where the deals aren't put together that well. There's always missing documentation. Is that what you see in your experience?
Well, as I told these new millennials coming on board, I said, you're going to get the worst deals known to man ahead of time. So the more that you understand niche products and how to resolve their problems, the better off you're going to be. Right. After that comes the gravy train. Once they trust you, then you don't have to do all of these notoriously bad deals. Then it goes to the next rookies that come along and help them out. But yes, I think that your natural, the natural progression is you're going to go out there, you're going to be tested, and as you're tested and you pass the test, you're going to get the better deals, and then the next rookies come on board, and then they're tested. And I think that does nothing more but strengthen their moxie. Now, where there's a warning sign is if month after month after month after month you have bad deals and you never get to the good deals. That tells me that we have an inherent sales problem because you're not building trust with the referral sources.
Right. What is your thought about, and I'm just certainly what I see when I'm consulting, and certainly not that long ago, I was asking originators that, again, were 20, 25 years in the business. I mean, these were not rookies by any stretch of the imagination. I was asking them, what sales training did you feel you needed? And probably not surprising that they didn't really feel they needed any sales training. Is that something that you see?
Well, I see that once you have your business established, unless you're going to continue to grow it, I suppose you don't have to worry about your sales training, right? But if you want to grow your business, and if you want to keep your business, and if you want to keep your attrition of losing your referral sources each year down, then you need to kind of step up when it comes to sales and different marketing techniques. Sales and marketing are two different things. One is, how am I approaching a person, and what are the metrics around that? And marketing is, who am I approaching, and what do I need to do, and what are some of the newer techniques? So there are two different techniques that they need to employ, and I think sometimes they just throw them all into the same bucket and say, well, I'm successful, I don't need to do any of this. And as you become more and more productive, there's inherently you want to get a little lazier, but as top producers have learned, many of them are good friends of mine, the lazier that they get, the more their referral sources disappear through attrition to the young and hungry rookies. So if you're not keeping up on it, guess what? You're going to lose them.
Yeah, that's a great point to end with today, because certainly what I see actually is the top producers are the ones who always want learning. What you tend to see is the ones that are really kind of the C, or kind of in the comfort zone. They're the ones that think that, they can ride it out and hopefully, make enough money. But truly, with today being so competitive, it's very, very tough. Tammy, all great points today. I certainly appreciate your comments. I know Tammy is active on LinkedIn. She has a lot of blogs, and so certainly I would recommend for those on the call today to connect with her. She'd love to chat with you and talk about different ways to improve the sales performance side of it. So thanks, Tammy, for all your comments. They were great.
Oh, thank you, Pat. I appreciate you having me, and I hope it was helpful.